Hey there, DBT community. Welcome to another session of Coalesce. My name is Kyle. I'm the head of training over at DBT Labs, and I'm super excited to be your host for this session. We're going to get meta with this session called Building a Metadata Ecosystem with DBT. Our wonderful speaker is Darren Haken, the head of engineering for platform and data at AutoTrader. He starts his day with coffee and looks forward to driving his new electric vehicle, a Volkswagen ID3, and in a past life was a DJ in Manchester. He's a huge fan of Japan and has visited 5 times. Just so you know, all chat conversations are taking place over in Coalesce Metadata Ecosystem channel of DBT Slack. If you're not part of that chat, head over to community.getdbt.com in your browser and then find the channel Coalesce Metadata Ecosystem. We encourage you to ask attendees and the speaker questions, make comments, react, drop memes, all sorts of things, especially metadata, the hot topic right now. We'd love to get the chat going. If you have a question, please just put the red question mark emoji at the beginning of your comment so that I can make sure I bring that up later if we have time for live questions. And so at the end of the talk, any questions that haven't been answered live will be answered directly in Slack. And without further ado, let's get meta with Darren. Over to you.
Thanks for that, Kyle. I truly mean it. If you do like my talk, I am definitely happy to accept a sheet. I've wanted one for many years. I just need the perfect opportunity. Hi, I'm Darren. I'm head of engineering at AutoTrader. I work in the platform and data space. My role really is to build capabilities across our platform that help the rest of the organization. And a big area of that I focus on is the data and analytics. How do we democratize data? How do we build tooling and capabilities around machine learning, analytics, the whole raft, to help the rest of our product teams, marketeers, executives, whoever, to work with data. Today's agenda, the kind of structure I want to go through around this metadata topic that I'm very passionate and very interested about at the moment, especially with the platform lens that I do my day-to-day. I'm going to start by talking about AutoTrader's journey to this decentralization. And this is the kind of context, the groundwork that explains why I think this metadata topic is so interesting. Then I'm going to talk about the hero of this, the metadata. And I'm going to finish off a little bit around, if you're interested in metadata, which I hope you are after this talk, how do we as a community kind of take that forward and move it as an industry? So let's start with a bit about AutoTrader. So for those that don't know who AutoTrader are, and some of you might not know, we are the largest automotive marketplace in the UK, established in 1977. So very old. In fact, I took a screenshot on the right here. So we actually used to be called in 1977 Thames Valley Trader. It looked very old. I was actually surprised not to see horse and carriages on there. It looks that old. But we're just an old kind of magazine. You could buy it in the Thames Valley area, which is a part of the UK, and buy a car. And to the right of that is kind of a modern take on that, which is a fully digital organization that helps people buy and sell cars online. And in terms of scale, which is always helpful for this, we have about 58 million cross-platform visits. And we're around roughly about the 12th largest site in terms of traffic here in the UK. So pretty, reasonable sized data, lots of activity. And generally people, love to look for cars or buy cars. It's a very kind of key thing for a lot of families. And so the part that's interesting about this is 1977 is a very long time. And that actually means that AutoTrader has had many stages in its data journey. These aren't accurate timescales. They're just trying to show more of a sort of growth or movement or transition. But at some point when computers existed around, God knows when, I imagine at first we actually worked with paperwork, but the dawn of analytics, as far as I'm concerned from a digital perspective, was we probably had people working with spreadsheets on some level and trying to do analytics about the marketplace and helping us make sense of what we need to do. Some period around sort of 15 years ago, we started building out a centralized data warehouse and building reporting on top of that. And it was a very classic period of analytics for that time. I'm sure if some of you have been working in analytics since that period, you'll fully know it. And moving further into sort of more modern terms, we started looking at data lakes, machine learning. How do we do more predictive components of that? Which has then led us into this sort of more recent journey where I've been a lot more involved in the last few years. And that's building out what we call our self-serve data platform, which to me is building capabilities that are self-serve by the rest of our organization. And then recently, one of the bigger focuses over the last sort of 12, maybe 18 months is more of a move to decentralization with how we work with teams in our platform on data. And we're really focusing on this data mesh architecture that's been discussed quite a lot in industry, which hopefully some of you may have heard of. So in terms of this self-serve data platform, worth giving a bit of an explanation of that for what it is, in my opinion. So one of the key areas some of my teams work on is building what we call our data platform. And that is building capabilities that let product teams, marketeers, like I said earlier, work with data. And we do that by building tooling or making it easier to work with certain things. So as an example, we use a technology called Apache Spark. It's very complex to run that from zero, from I want to run Spark. So what we do is we provide tooling to make it really easy to do that. And one of the other areas that we love, which I'm going to describe as our practitioners. So practitioners are people who are maybe data engineers, software engineers, analytics engineers, data scientists. I'm going to bundle that under practitioner. One of the technologies that we've fell in love with across that kind of cohort is DBT. And so crucially, from a self-serve data platform perspective, we've invested in trying to make that available to everybody to work with and make it as easy as possible. And through that investment, we've actually seen this explosion in data practitioners. So by trying to build this self-serve data platform and invest in DBT, we've actually seen this huge shift of an explosion of users across the organization. And to kind of back that up, a few illustrations. So we've got an explosion of users based on, we started working with DBT about 2019. Actually, I was tinkering with it and looking at it, and we were exploring it as an alternative solution to working with Apache Spark, with the premise that it was easier for a wider set of practitioners to work with. And that's pretty good. We've moved into a place now where we're actually more probably in the 70 regions. I put this together a few months ago, but we've got about 60, 70 active practitioners. And this is across an engineering org of 200 people, with a organization size of about 1,000. And the reason I can pull this through, by the way, is at the moment we use DBT and we use it in like a monolithic approach. So we've got one central repository. And so obviously I can go to GitHub like this and I can see contributors on master. But that's pretty awesome. We've now got from 4 people-ish to 60, 70. That's great. That's a nice explosion. That's vibrant community. And another lens of how we can see that is we've got a bunch of people who are using Slack, and we've got this sort of review process where if someone's doing DBT, they should get somebody else to review that. So if I look in Slack, which I did a few months back, I was putting this talk together, there's a bunch of people who were like, hey, I've done some DBT work. Can somebody have a look at this for me and review it? That's awesome. Little bit more worrying in terms of the explosion of users is this 79 active pull requests. So that was actually, so another lens I thought as well, if we've got active contributors and the way that people do things is through pull requests, let's have a look at how many we've got. So 79 actually is a little bit more worrying, because even though it shows an explosion of users, it's actually probably showing we've got a bit of a backing up here as well, and we're not actually getting through them. So a little bit more alarmed at this one, but nonetheless is showing an explosion of users. So to bring this sort of what I was describing as a decentralization together with DBT, we've tried to organize the way we work with data around kind of business domains. Or so an example of that would be, we've got this marketing domain, and inside that we've got these like groupings of data that represent things like looking at campaign performance. This might be like social campaigns or advertising campaigns, and looking at the performance of them. Maybe we're tracking a bunch of data around SEO. And so we're actually trying to build out a bit of data modeling to look at SEO optimizations and things we can do with that. On the other side, we might have a sales domain. And in there, we're looking for sales opportunities or churning customers and that kind of thing. And with that, we have a bunch of people working in these areas who are actively developing in DBT. So within the sales domain, we've maybe got 5, 10, whatever number of people actively developing DBT data models to do things like risks and sale opportunities. And on the marketing side, we may have a similar size number of people doing things like campaign performance and so on. So explosion of users, lots of activity with DBT, brilliant, amazing. However, distributing our data across the organization has not just been the perfect situation we expected, and we have seen a set of new challenges that have come from that, which is what I'm going to get into now. The challenges. So one of the challenges we've seen by this decentralization is this problem of sort of ownership / maintainers of DBT. So we've had this explosion of people now working across all these domains, and they're actively working. But we've been experiencing this problem where people work on things and they stop working on them and forget about them. And we actually, the data platform team, one of my teams, did an audit of all the DBT models we had in our monorepo and looked for, I don't know, people who wave their hand and said, yeah, I own that. That's something I'm responsible for. And 20% of our models had no sort of ownership or maintainer in there. And this isn't a dig at DBT specifically, because we actually looked at other tools we use like Airflow, Spark, and other things. And this is just a common occurrence or a problem spread across all of our technology. And it's actually more this decentralization, I think, that's caused it. More alarmingly, what we discovered is we use Looker to drive and access some of our data we build with DBT. And we found that Looker had 74 references to BigQuery tables. We use BigQuery that were connected to these ownerless DBT models. And that's a little bit concerning because people who use Looker might not really be as connected with the DBT work. And maybe it's our CFO or our CMO, or it could be somebody in our accounts and sales team who are accessing data. And there's the view, this is well-maintained and reliable data, right? Because it's available in Looker. But that might not be true. Certainly maybe for 20% or 74 references. So ownership problems, which I've covered there, but just to make sure I've not missed anything, we start asking questions, especially my platform teams who want to look at like quality and stability here. Who are the maintainers of these models? Like, who is it? We can't find them. And then that kind of cascades into what stakeholders depend on this data. And the bit where I think this is really important as well is if we have a bug or some sort of production incident or something goes wrong with that data, who is there to fix that? Who resolves it? If a model is broken, who fixes it? So this is a problem that we started to see when we've saw this explosion of users. And then this is other thing which I've struggled to give a title for, but hopefully this makes sense. But it's this sort of idea of sharing data without permission. So it's really easy, I think, in DBT to, especially within our monorepo at the moment, to access and reference data. You've got the ref function, we can look up and I can access data. But that means it's very easy cross-team at the moment for like team A to access data from team B. So I see it as it's like teams depending on other teams' data without permission, because this ref hasn't, been agreed necessarily by one of the other teams. And so what we're seeing here is this sort of lack of contracts. So team A can access team B's data and they don't actually know that. They can reference it and they're kind of blissfully unaware of that. And we've seen this other issues that start to manifest with that, where, I don't know, one team, say we had like sessions data, so user tracking data, and we've got some sessions table. Maybe a couple of our different teams have got tables they call sessions, and it's for different parts of our business, right? So maybe brand new cars, leasing cars, used cars, and they want to look at sessions around these sort of vehicles, but they called them all. We found that we end up with this kind of multiple sources of truth problem where when different teams are referencing different sessions tables because they thought that was the right sessions table, and then we have to backtrack on some of that. And that creates this sort of ripple, right? So this trust, confidence, people want to validate, am I accessing the right sessions table here? They want that validation because they're not trusting the data, right? They're asking that question to make sure. And then the other part of that is it's made it feel like it's expensive for us when we want to restrict access to data. So we've got very openness at the moment, very easy to access the data, but actually sometimes we don't want that, maybe for GDPR reasons or personal data or some sort of intellectual property we want to protect. We want to restrict that. And just, I guess the sort of blocking of data is at the moment for us feels more expensive. I've got an example of this. Don't worry, don't need to read all of the slide. I'm not sure if any of you can actually read all of the boxes, but visualizations are helpful nonetheless. In this example, I've got this kind of top node, and that's what we call one of our teams, which are called the stock and search platform team. And they had a bunch of DBT and they've got it in their kind of world of DBT modeling, and they built out a bunch of stuff. And actually they've got data that a lot of teams care about. They've got really like high value data. And so actually all these other teams underneath reference their data because they want to work with it to do what they need to do in their area of the organization. But the stock and search team didn't know that all these people were referencing their data through the kind of ref function. And so when we actually had a data incident, we had a production incident where there was a problem with their stock and search platform's data, and it cascaded. So the blast radius was quite significant. and all these different teams were affected. So yeah, don't worry, don't read all of the boxes and everything, but it was just to illustrate this kind of blast radius idea of the data was not encapsulated, it was leaking out into different teams. And we've got this other problem that's starting to happen with this explosion of users where discoverability, finding the right data, is getting harder and harder. We've got people now moving to Slack and almost this sort of tribalism about, hey, does anyone know where I can find this data? I'm looking for X, I'm looking for Y. Can people help me? And so that's why I describe that as like tribalism, because it's about what the people know in the community. And that has some upper limit, right, on scale, because eventually everyone can remember all the data we work with, at least not at an organization of where I work our size. So it's got a good and a bad thing, right? Like people are obviously interested and they want to access data, but at the same time, if it was more discoverable, more intuitive, then maybe they wouldn't have to use Slack to ask these questions. So we've got these challenges. It's happened through this decentralization and explosion of users, which is still a fantastic problem to have. But I still feel like we need a scalable way to overcome these challenges exposed by decentralization. And an overriding principle for me, or overarching principle, is I'd like to approach this with automation. It'd be very easy actually to introduce governance and human processes, and so let's go harder on reviews, or let's hire more people to attack all of the active pull requests we've got. But a lot of my background is software engineering, and I've learned through that process that human processes are either error prone or we just cannot keep up with the scale, right? So we need automation, ways of validating that to keep us moving at scale. And that's where, for me, one of the most interesting things or ways we could probably solve these challenges is through this idea of metadata. So some really awesome news. DBT supports metadata. It's part of it. It supports it. It's brilliant. So the idea is that in your kind of schema or YAML files, your definitions of your models, there is this meta block that sits underneath the model. And you can see it on the right-hand side on this slide. And inside it, it can contain key values. So for example, I think this is from the actual DBT doc, so it was at some point. And we've got owner, and we're saying you have @Alice. And there's this other one, which is model maturity. And so we can encapsulate all of this model development and metadata together. We've got metadata as code, which I'm sure hopefully all of you know is great, and it's all version control. So that's brilliant. And then because it's all as code, we can actually integrate our metadata and use it in our CI/CD pipeline, the way we deploy DBT. And this is just a CI/CD pipeline. So you got code gets injected in GitHub. DBT does a compilation like build stage. Then in there, I've got this green circle, which is what I'm saying is we can build a hook to apply what I'm describing as automated policies on the metadata. And I'll get into what I mean by that next. We then use Airflow at the moment to schedule DBT on a regular basis. That pushes data in, that writes data into Google BigQuery. And one of the other hooks, which I'll touch on, is we can synchronize this metadata to the broader ecosystem. So automated policies. So one of the kind of models that we followed at AutoTrader is we've grouped metadata together using like a namespace or a prefix. So we've got this data governance dot model. So anything to relate to data governance would be grouped together. And we've come up with all these different attributes like business owner, team owner, and all that kind of thing. And the great thing about this is we can create policies. So in that build stage I described earlier, this hook in our CI/CD, we've written some Python modules that inspect the DBT manifest, and it looks to see what values exist for all the models on the metadata. And that lets us define policies. We can come up with any policies we want. But as examples of that could be, we want to make sure that all of our models have an owner. And if they don't have an owner, we fail the build. Maybe we create some sort of flag, which is like the life cycle. And we say production models can only be used by other teams. And so if it's a developer one or it's in test, it can't. Or maybe we use this PII flag and say only the security team can access that data model. And we can apply that and automate it through the policy. And we've done this through a kind of inspiration from a linting platform. If anyone's used one, then you can get the idea. But we've got these rules and we've built rules. And then on the right-hand side, this little box at the bottom right is showing this is a legitimate build failure that happened in our CI/CD. So no metadata existed for one of the models, and so it failed to build, and that can't go to production anymore, which is amazing. And then on the ecosystem side, so we've covered the build, automated policies. And on the right, I have that other green blob, which was the synchronized to metadata. So I've exploded that. And what I'm really saying here is you can use that metadata and you can push it out to other technologies that you're using in your modern data stack, your ecosystem. And for us, we're looking at a metadata solution / data catalog called Data Hub. And we've been using for quite some time a monitoring data observability tool called Monte Carlo. So I'll share a couple of examples of how we use that metadata in that way. So one of the other kind of namespace blocks that we've used is this data observability. So anything we see related to data observability, we're bundling together under a namespace of data observability. And the only one that's probably worth looking at here without going into too much detail about Monte Carlo is this notification channel. So the idea of that is the team that's building the DBT models can say, this notification channel is a Slack channel. And if there's a problem with my data model, I want you to send the alert into there and tell me there's a problem with and so like in the packages we've written in Python in the CI/CD, we'll hook into that and then synchronize that into Monte Carlo. And this is an example of that. So Monte Carlo is on the left. So essentially we've grabbed that metadata, we've posted it to the Monte Carlo API and it's registered it. And then when there's a problem on the right-hand side, you get this Slack alert to say, there's a problem with your data model in production, it's gone wrong and you need to look at that. And we've driven all of that through automation, synchronizing that into the ecosystem. And then the other one we're evaluating at the moment is this trying to tackle discovery. And that's through a kind of central metadata. So we're looking at a tool called Data Hub, which is an open source metadata store. And the great thing about these is they can bring metadata together from all sorts of services. It makes them searchable. And hopefully it reduces tribal knowledge, it reduces the Slack queries. And on the right, we've actually been pulling in all the metadata fields into it. And it's already, they're adding like new features. It's worth looking, but we've also started seeing that they've grabbed this meta block and they're pushing it into all the different components like owners and tags and everything. So it's really exciting and it makes it fully searchable. So I'm running out of time, so I'm going to get through to the end part, which is hopefully by this point you've seen the problems decentralization can cause and the like multiple people or lots of people working with DBT at scale. And hopefully you can also understand that metadata might be one of the ways that we can tackle some of this and keep that explosion of users, because we want that, but we also want all that stability that you get when you've got fewer people working on a code base. So where do we go from here is around what if you want to start using metadata. And so one of the things that I think we need in industry is a centralized metadata store. So even though lots of tools attempt to, DBT, for example, we've got metadata in DBT, but I'm imagining you're in a similar place to me where you use lots of data tools around DBT, adjacent technologies, maybe a BI tool like Looker, a data warehouse, I don't know, Fivetran to ingest data, whatever. This diagram here is actually from LakeFS, who are a company who build a open source file format, file storage. And they do this landscape view every year, and you can see there's absolutely loads of technologies. I use some of these, you'll use different ones. But the point of all of this is why we need to centralize the metadata so we can get all of these tools and bring it into a central hub, in my opinion. There's a few worth looking at out there. So Data Hub's one I mentioned we're reviewing. Munzen's another one that's quite interesting. And we've got Marquez, but there's loads of them popping up now, these centralized kind of metadata stores. It's not really a solved problem, but it's very exciting. And DBT is also looking at it. I've seen a few things coming up as well. So that's super exciting. One of the other things I think that we need to look at is this standardized metadata. So these ideas of like ownership and governance and observability that we've come up with at Autotrader, I don't feel like they're unique, right? These concepts like must exist across the organizations. And this is why I think we need to start exploring like standard ways of documenting ownership, for example. And that's super important, right? Because then the ecosystem of metadata can thrive, because lots of tools can say, well, as long as I understand what this standardized metadata is for ownership, I can use it within my software, my tool. And without that, we're going to end up with 500 different ways of defining ownership. And it'll be really expensive to integrate it all together and have an ecosystem. There are some emerging standards out there for this. So we've got open metadata and open lineage are worth looking at, and they're making attempts now at trying to build at these standards. And I think it's what we need. So I think it's just really exciting. I'll go and take a look at these projects. So really the reason I put this talk, and this is like the final part for me, is this is a call to arms actually. So this metadata thing for me is super exciting. It's the only problem is there isn't any standards out there and there are no kind of incumbent metadata solutions yet, but it is really important. And I think this is where it's a call to arms to me. If you think it's important or you believe this metadata concept is a good idea, then I think the way we can take this forward is through open source, right? If we get together, especially the DBT community, because there's absolutely loads of people using DBT, we can all work together to drive these standards and maybe invest, or maybe we contribute to Data Hub, or maybe we contribute to a Munzen, or maybe we contribute to Open Lineage. But whatever it is, I'm just trying to spur people on to think about how you could contribute. So takeaways from the talk: distributed teams, or lots of people working with DBT across lots of teams in a decentralized fashion, can introduce a lot of these challenges that I've seen, and I'm sure it's not unique to me. Like, metadata is a really powerful tool that we can use to automate some of these problems. And I also think these missing components in industry around metadata in the modern data stack, we can solve them together by contributing. So that's what I hope that you do straight after this talk, but also buy me a Shiba. So if you do want to know more, AutoTrader, where I work, we write lots of blogs and everything. We try to get it out there on the engineering blog, so go and take a look. And if you're in the UK or thinking about moving to the UK and you're interested in a role with us, then go to careers.autotrader or feel free to message me. But we're always looking for people that are passionate. And that's all. And yeah, I'm open for any questions. I don't know, Kyle, if you can jump on. Not? Okay.
Yeah, Darren, thank you so much. I really appreciated how you mentioned pain points throughout there and how you address them. I have one question I'll raise from a different Kyle Shannon. And his question is, who on what teams were involved in defining the structure of the metadata you use organization-wide, and how did those conversations go?
Okay. Yeah, so this is actually a really good question. I've not been asked this before, but I've talked about it before. So we got the teams together, actually. So a lot of it's been driven through the challenges that we witnessed. So we'd find a problem and then we'd look at like what metadata we needed to tackle. This was one of the issues I found, and this is why I think standards are important. So we started looking at ownership first. And then I thought, surely there's going to be a bunch of people out there who said, here's some really good metadata you'd want to capture about ownership. And there wasn't, actually. And so I spoke to passionate people in the space who shared what they've learned through their organizations, and we got started from there. But what we did is we just brought a working group together, like a specialist interest group or a guild around the metadata in the org, and then pulled like DBT practitioners from, say, 3 or 4 teams and said, hey, like, we need to move this forward, and then built it out that way. But it's been evolving. So we started as limited as we could and then widened the metadata.